Hello friends, we have been discussing the writing of Gertrude Stein and especially with respect to her poetry, and today I will be discussing in some detail her very long poem, Stanzas in Meditation. Uh, we have already discussed the way in which Stein's writing makes use of repetition, it makes use of alliteration, it makes use of different rhyme schemes. And then we have this very, very long poem of 164 stanzas divided into 5 parts, written in 1933. So, to discuss in detail stanzas in meditation, it would not be possible to look at each of the parts separately. So, I will be looking at stanzas in meditation to understand some of the chief highlights not only of the stanzas in meditation as a poem, but also Stein's style of writing. I have also been talking about critic Ulla E. Dido, who writes about the way in which Stein, in a single summer at her country house, wrote both what is called her most abstract, disembodied work and her most concrete referential work. A literature of word compositions rather than a literature of subject matter. So, exactly what do I mean here? So, Dido explains that Stein is writing these two very different, uh, uh, you know, styles in two very different styles at the same time. So, one is of course life writing, where she is using the persona of Aristocles, and the other is poetry, stanzas in meditation, where it is totally it resonates with the modernist style, absolutely high modernism. So, and this the style that is used in her poetry, Dido calls it her most abstract, disembodied work, and of course the most more concrete and referential work is also done at the same time. Here of interest is the word disembodied. So, if we look at the way in which the avant-garde writers of the early 20th century, turn of the century and early 20th century, writers, they make use of disembodiment in their work. So today, in a lot of literary theories and aspects of writing, we discuss embodiment. And here I would like to suggest that the way in which Stein makes use of disembodiment, it becomes another kind of embodiment. What does this mean? If I use the word abstract here, that will explain. So, for instance, if we say on reading the stanzas that it is very abstract and does not make sense, then the abstract is what is concrete in her writing. Similarly, to disembody, to strip language of a certain kind of referential meaning and to present something beneath the words, this becomes another kind of embodiment. And in this sense, the disembodied work becomes an embodied work of a different kind. Why? Because we have literature here of word compositions. And this is not a literature that is going to, Stein's poetry is not going to describe a particular object, a particular situation in detail, but it is going to present to you a kind of what Dido calls a word composition. And so, this critic, of course, poses two questions in this long poem, one with respect to meaning, and the other is with respect to form. Because, on the one hand, she is writing an autobiography which has a specific frame, it has a specific, time specific narrative, and the other, of course, resonates. Its mood is, as the critic points out, abstract, like a cubist painting. So, if we look at a cubist painting and we look at the geometrical aspects of a particular figure, a particular object that are juxtaposed, similarly, the different structures in the mind are juxtaposed here. To quote Dido here, Stanzas in Meditation is Stein's longest work of poetry and her most difficult, more disembodied than any work she had ever written and any she was to write. The stanzas were the purest word constructions she ever created. So we come back to the fact that this work, really speaking, is her most disembodied one. If we look at the first poem about the house, one is still able to understand a lot of things. But here, it is almost as if the stanzas in meditation are an invitation to penetrate beneath the words and to understand the way in which language and mind function. So, there is, a question that Stein was asked about her language, and Dido points out that one of the things that Stein actually says is that there is a kind of, and this is from a draft letter by Gertrude Stein, and I quote, that there is an exactitude of abstract thought and poetry as created by exactness and as far as possible disembodiment, if one may use such a word, creating sense by intensity of exactness. So, where there is no referential center, here I would like to pose a question that there is exactness. Now, when we use the word exact, one tends to look at things in their concrete form. Exact would mean that things appear to us in their concrete form, and if one reads words on the page, then they give us concrete meaning. But for Gertrude Stein, she uses her poetry to actually challenge this idea. And the exactitude that Gertrude Stein is striving for is the exactitude of abstract thought and poetry. And so the word disembodiment is primarily used by her. Here, if we head towards literary theory, then Derrida and the whole idea of deconstruction is there. Here we see there is no referential center. So, before, in fact, to share, a few lines before one actually looks at some of the responses to her writing would be interesting. So, here are a few lines from Stanzas in Meditation. This is from part 1, and it begins like this. Part 1 begins like this. I caught a bird which made a ball, and they thought better of it. But it is all of which they taught that they were in a hurry yet. In a kind of a way, they meant it best. So, without really getting into the lines and their meaning, if we look at the two figures that are primarily there in this particular poem, one is the first person I caught a bird, the speaker, and then there is they. Who is they in this particular poem? And there is also a she. The she probably refers to Alice Toklas. I refers to the poet herself, but they refers to the reader, they refers to the world outside, the external world, so to say, and their assumptions. So, having looked at a couple of these lines, it's important to understand the way in which Gertrude Stein's writing has been read, interpreted and understood. So, Elizabeth Winston points out that Stanzas in Meditation has actually evoked 3 different critical responses. So, of course, this kind of writing has been totally, negated. So, in 1958, for instance, Yalden Thompson suggests that there is a lot of influence of the German philosophers, and Yalden Thompson says, Gertrude Stein's contempt for clarity is what Thompson talks about, and predicts that because of its difficulty, the stanzas in Meditation will receive very little attention. Whether they deserve better or not is what he says. And then there is Hilary Cork, who writes in the Kenyon Review 3 years later, again this is around 1960s, so about what stanzas deserved. And Hilary Cork says that it was deliberately meaningless rubbish, and perhaps, to quote, the dreariest long poem in the world, offering the absolute minimum in reward or pleasure against somewhere near the maximum in obstruction. So, which means that the poem is, treated, is referred to as meaningless rubbish, or, the fact that the reader is to be kept in mind. So, when a reader reads stanza in meditation, there are no answers that the reader will get. There is no referential center. There is no summary that a reader can give to herself. So there is no reward and there is no pleasure. But then there is another kind of reading that emerges, and this is by Donald Sutherland, who in the preface to Stanzas in Meditation and Other Poems says that Stein was trying to convert ideas into poetry. And Sutherland talks about her, her style almost like a Pindaric ode, because there is a stress on movement, there is a stress on accent, there is a stress on phrasing. So there is a syntax that she's evolving, and this kind of syntax, and a rhetorical style that we studied in the previous poem, which is about the house that is just twinkling in the moonlight. So this is, and of course her use of rhyme schemes, repetition, playing lines again and again. So Sutherland says that Stein is converting ideas into poetry, and for Sutherland and for some other critics later, even though this is of course considered to be an abstract poem, Stein tests the possibilities of her medium, which is language. So the language itself is being stretched. Language is being taken to an absolutely different level to deal with the very complex way in which ideas emerge in the mind. So language in that sense, or the subject here, when it is to be conveyed in a language, it is a point of departure. And it is not just a topic that Vincent says that is going to be like an exposition. So, of course, this is again, once again, by critics like Vincent, compared with a cubist painting, like a violin, the top of a glass, and all aspects of all objects that are mentioned in that line are recognizable. And here again, I would like to also draw attention to the fact that when one looks at a painting, especially, a cubist painting, there are different things that one sees. Similarly, this idea is also brought in Stein's poetry, because a lot of the ideas that are translated into words, into word formations, word compositions, and presented, they will mean different things for different readers. And that is the beauty, the strength of poetry by Gertrude Stein. That, of course, also can be considered to be problematic in a certain sense, where meaning is evaded. If meaning is evaded and the focus is on the linguistic construct, it of course resonates with the times, but makes it problematic for the reader to derive meaning. So, again, stanzas is also classified, with those works in which Stein experiments. So, this idea of experimentation that we see in the avant-garde artists, avant-garde writers, with respect to painting, with respect to art, with respect to a certain kind of architecture, in theatre, in stage design, all these ideas can also be seen in poetry. And one of the classic examples of this then is Gertrude Stein's Stanzas in Meditation. So, as I have mentioned earlier, that the word meditation should explain it all. it draws attention to the fact that these are ideas that are evolving in the mind. So, if we take a look at, in part one, the characters, there is a focus on, the achievement of fame, its effect on people, power relations among people who are close to each other, the aesthetics of writing, and how it is very different from other kinds of writing. So there is a kind of aesthetic principle. So to come to the stanzas itself, I caught a bird which made a ball, and they thought better of it. So here the speaker is talking about a bird that has made a ball, and they refers to the other people. But it is all of which they taught, that they were in a hurry, yet in a kind of way they meant it best, that they should change in and on account, but they must not stare when they manage. So, the whole idea being that whatever they are liable to do, it is easy to pursue them once in a while, and in a way there is no repose. They like it best in that sense. So, but it is very often just by the time that they are able to separate, in which case, in effect, they could not only be very often present perfectly in each way, whichever they chose. So, there is, a degree of abstraction that is employed here to make a point, but also in a sense that there is meaning beneath these word compositions. So, if we, for instance, look at the way in which this particular stanza ends, not only what they have at their instigation, made for it as a decision in its entirety, made that they minded as well as blinded, lengthened for them welcome in repose, but which they open as a chance, but made it be perfectly their allowance, all which they antagonize as once for all, kindly have it joined as they mind. So they mind, the point of view of the external world is being foregrounded and is also being, the poet is being critical of this. So the characters, consider this, what is really speaking the impact of the achievement of fame, and what is the impact of this on the creative person who engages in, let's say, maybe writing. There are issues related to identity that are explored here. Another example here would be, stanza 15. This is the last stanza of part 1. So here she says, should they, maybe they might if they delight. So please, here again we see a constant reference to they, which means that aspects of the external world are being captured through these word compositions. So the question here is, should they, maybe they might, if they delight. So if they like it, they just might. But the question here is, the statement begins with, should they? In why they must see it be there, not only necessarily. So why must they see it? But which they might, in which they might. Again, there is repetition here to undercut, to challenge, and might, of course, possibility, but might also in terms of strength. So which they might, for which they might delight if they look there. And they see there that they look there. So there is a gaze that is being identified here. This is the gaze of the external world. They constantly refers to people in the world out there. And the focus here remains on seeing, it remains on looking. But the very first word, should they, I think that challenges what they are looking, if they do not occasion it to be different from what it is. Again, so there is looking, there is place, because, for instance, in this line, to see it be there, which it is, if it is. So it's not for sure that it is there, whatever be that object, but it is there if it actually is there. So here there is a constant use of rhetoric, constant turn of ideas. So there might not be coherent meaning, but two or three things that are very clear. One, the idea of looking. There is place, and there is the gaze of the external world, but obviously the first, the first two words, should they, become very important. Suddenly, in this particular stanza, the mood changes completely. In one direction, there is the sun and the moon. In the other direction, there are cumulus clouds and the sky. In the other direction, there is why. They look at what they see. They look very long while they talk along. And they may be said to see that at which they look whenever there is no chance of its not being warmer than if they wish which they were. So, the idea of looking, the idea of the gaze has already been established in the first part of stanza 15. And then in the second part of stanza 15, all this is, a part of part 1 of stanzas in meditation. So as you can see, the stanzas in meditation are a huge challenge to the reader, not only because of its length, but because of the intensity that we see here. So the looking has been established, and the sun, the moon, the clouds are all brought in. And the people are walking, they are talking, they are looking along, and they may be said to see that at which they look, which is the sun, moon, the clouds, whenever it's not, warmer. So, are these things the same? When they look, do they look at the same things or do they look at different things? Are they alike or are they different? So, the constant repetition tells us about how different points of view are possible. There is no use of punctuation in that sense. And at a later point, when Stein writes, no one is mere able to be sure. So, the capacity to perceive is very different, and each person's point of view, each person's gaze. So, one of the things that modernism does to connect this now with the larger movement, what do we gain here? What are we achieving by looking at this kind of wordplay? One is the larger question about language. Can language express the ideas of the mind perfectly? Is a question that Stein is asking. The second question that we have here is that if these different word compositions are juxtaposed, they are put together, then these completely defy the possibility and realization of any kind of meaning that is linear, that is concrete, that is perceptible. Because here, any kind of linearity, any possibility of concrete meaning is being denied. So, if there is no concrete meaning, what is Stein leaving us with? So, Stein is underscoring, is highlighting the possibility of each person looking differently. If we go back to those lines about, they look very long while they talk along. So, and each person is obviously not looking at the same object. They are not looking at the same thing, and they are not looking at, if they are looking at the same thing, they are not looking at it in the same way. So, there is this complexity that comes in Stein's writing, and what do we achieve? So, we achieve here what modernism achieves, which is the possibility of multiple points of view. It almost kind of pans into, a much later kind of modernism and the use of course, theories like postmodernism that emerge later. So, where the early sections, kind of create a certain kind of flow here we can see the use of disembodiment. As mentioned, that there is another character in this particular stanzas in meditation, and that is the figure of Aristocles. So, she may count 3 little daisies very well by multiplying to either 6, 9 or 14, or she can be well mentioned as 12. So the whole idea, she can count 3 little daisies very well and she can multiply it. So, it could be 3, 6, 9, and 14 doesn't figure, but 14 is mentioned, or it could be 12. So it could just about be anything which they may like. Again, the outside world, which they can like soon or more than ever, which they wish as a button. So, and of course, she ends part one by the line, I have my well wishers, thank you. So, she says, just as much as they arrange which they wish or they can, and so on. And finally, the last line is, I have my well wishers, thank you, almost kind of negating all that has possibly been worked out in the course of part one. So, perhaps the word, as Ashbery has pointed out, John Ashbery says, and I'll quote John Ashbery here, perhaps the word that occurs oftenest in the stanzas is the word they. For this is a poem about the world, about them. So, where of course one agrees with Ashbery here, one must not forget that the they is there always with respect to the I. What a pleasant change from the eternal we is what Ashbery says, with which so many modern poets begin each sentence. So, here instead of we, it is they. And so, less frequently, of course, but as I said, the I is very important. It enters to assess the activities of them. And as we get deeper into the poem, it seems not so much as if we were reading as living a rather long period of our lives with a house full of people. So, like people, Miss Stein's lines are comforting or annoying or brilliant or tedious, because there are moments when we are able to understand, and there are moments where the word composition defies meaning pretty much like lived life. So, it's not really the events or their way of happening and so on, but it is, the possibility. So, what Ashbery says is that this poem is Stanzas in Meditation is a hymn to possibility, a celebration of the fact that the world exists and things can happen. So, it has of course been for Ashbery one of her most successful attempts to do what cannot be done. And what is it that cannot be done? To create an alternative reality, what Ashbery calls a counterfeit of reality, more real than reality. So, I would like to end this lecture by saying that, to quote Ashbery, that if on laying the book aside, that is, if on laying the stanzas in meditation aside, we feel it is still impossible to accomplish the impossible, then we are left with the conviction that it is the only thing worth trying to do. So, Gertrude Stein's poetry, especially Stanzas in Meditation, is an attempt to evolve that alternative reality, that alternative life of our mind and its images, which seems like a very daunting task, which appears to be the impossible, but as is said, that it's probably the only thing worth trying to do. At the same time, there is, that note of caution about the fact that how is it, and this is something to think about, and I would leave you with that question, that if meaning is going to be located in the gaps between these different word compositions, then how does that meaning of this alternative reality work in the real life? Thank you. I hope you enjoyed listening to some aspects of Gertrude Stein's poetry.